So for those who haven't met me, I'm Hannah Burson. I'm the founder and CEO of Salt Collaboratory, and I'll tell you a little bit more about Salt and what we do and who we work with. Some of the folks who we work with are actually on this call, so you have extra special permission to chime in whenever you want. But today we have a guest with us, Reagan Wilson, who's joining us from Utah. And Reagan and I worked together in a training and consulting capacity, and she has lots of stories to tell. So we're going to get into that. But mostly, I just wanted to cover what our story is for today and what we're going to be working through. So this is what I'm hoping we will all get out of this learning agenda together. The first thing is, as you saw in the title, I'm talking about design thinking today, not from a product design perspective or a UX perspective or an innovation perspective, although all those elements tie in. I'm talking about it more from a leadership perspective, because those of us who are on this call have had storied leadership careers. We've done really great work. And sometimes it's still quite hard to pull off what we're trying to pull off. So I want to talk about that a little bit to get us into that headspace. And then I want to share with you how I found that design thinking was essentially the big unlock for me when it comes to those hard skills associated with getting leadership right. And it's not a typical skill set that leaders have, because I think, frankly, we missed it earlier in our career. It wasn't a thing. But I want to talk about, for those of you who said your experiences, what is it? How does it work? And make sure that we're all feeling comfortable with the content and the topic. But most of the time, I want to show you different examples. And this is where Reagan's going to help me, because she took what she learned and flew away with it. I want to show you different examples of how design thinking is actually used to get to that leadership experience that we're all after. A slightly different perspective, but hopefully one that's going to be relevant to all of you. So I'll tell you a little bit about me for those of you who don't know me. If you've heard that I worked for AOL, you know that I've been around for a while. Most of my career has either been in management consulting with some big firms, some firms based here in Seattle. I also had for a while a financial services career. I had my technology with a small T career. But a lot of my time has been in consulting in different industries. So a fair amount of time in healthcare and some nonprofit work at the Gates Foundation, and then some work in Starbucks. So I feel like I've had a chance to work with many leaders around the world, frankly, and in very different industries. And even if I don't know everything about leadership from an academic perspective, I've certainly seen it in the wild. And wild might be the operative word for some situations I found myself in. But about 6 years ago, I was introduced to design thinking for a specific project I was doing, and I was intrigued. I wanted to see how I could use it in my leadership practice. And after playing with it while I was still at Point B for a while, I decided to step out and set up my own company. And that's all I do right now in different contexts. I would like to introduce my friend, Reagan. Reagan, you're up. Tell us all about you.
Yeah, I'm Reagan Wilson. I am the VP of Ecosystem Consulting at Spur, which is a consulting firm based in Bellevue, Washington. However, I hail out of the great state of Utah. I run a pretty broad team that is made up of our ecosystem or channel strategy and transformation team, our automation team, data and analytics, as well as engineering. And we call that ecosystem at Spur. I've got over 25 years of partner management and program and automation experience. So I came up through the ranks through the likes of Microsoft, Intel, Cisco, working with partners and helping them be successful with those vendors. And now I get to consult with those types of companies on helping them do better with their indirect channels. And you can see some of the clients that I've worked with there underneath. And I had the opportunity to meet Hannah when I started at Spur and was exposed to the awesome training that we did within Spur around design thinking, and the rest is history.
Thanks so much, Reagan. Such a pleasure to have you. Such a pleasure to work with you. Reagan took my fire and made it a fire of her own, quite literally. And we're excited to talk to you about the work that we do together. So with Spur, it was actually a mix of all three of these. There was a fair amount of training, and you'll see that in a minute. We were also a Salt Collaboratory was brought in to help consult with Spur with some of their clients. And then we actually had a chance to do some leadership coaching as well. And the reason why I share all these different aspects is because what I try to do and what we try to do at SALT is to meet our clients where they're at. And because we're not taking off the shelf products, we're able to essentially mold what we're doing to get the outcomes that the clients are needing at the time. So we're agnostic, regardless of what the need is, as long as we can help people move forward with the power of design thinking. And I feel really fortunate to have been able to work with some wonderful clients. We've got Reagan from Spur. I think I saw Bershu join from Schneider Electric. I was with him and his team in the Toronto area just 2 weeks ago. I have gone in and out of RVs at Winnebago. I've shown people pictures of my pet at Blue Pearl. I care a lot about functional medicine, apparently, and dental insurance. And the reason why I'm sharing this is because what I found is that this skill set and capability is relevant and important to leaders anywhere who are awake and looking for new and interesting ways of getting their work done. So it's an exciting space for me because I get to visit everybody. So that's a little bit of background about Reagan and I. And before we move forward, I just want to pause for a second and give you guys a minute to reflect on this question of what do you think leadership excellence actually is? What comes to mind? Maybe not the 50 things, but what's the top one or two things that pop into your head when you hear leadership excellence? I'd like to see what you think. So if you don't mind putting some of that in the chat, I bet you know the answer to the question. Active listening, emotional intelligence, clear and powerful vision and messages, courage, I love that. Wisdom and guidance, empathy, thanks, Steve. Space to be their best selves, humility. Isn't it interesting? These are, hi, Karen, when you think your team is performing at high levels, absolutely. We know what this is. We know what leadership excellence is because we've either done it ourselves, tried to do it ourselves, or seen it from other people. So from what you're all saying, I'm going to summarize it a little bit. I know I did my homework before, but I had a sense that we would be talking about this. So it's essentially our job as excellent leaders or outstanding leaders is really to be able to inspire and motivate others to the shared vision. Some of you said that. I didn't see a lot of this, but I think it's behind what some of you are saying. We have tough challenges that we need to address with our teams. And if we don't come up with new and interesting ways of doing it, we're not going to make progress. So that creativity and innovation. And I think a lot of you were pointing to this bottom bullet around a culture of trust, inclusion, collaboration, diversity, just making sure that we're not terribly worried about exactly what the spreadsheet's going to look like. We're not going to get anything done unless we're able to create this type of experience for our teams. It's the left brain stuff. I know that it doesn't exactly work like this in our brains, but I feel like a lot of us, I think about my education, I think about the training I did early in my career, lots of analytical stuff, lots of project management skills. Not so much on that whole creative. That's not something we really do in business. And yet it's the combination of all of these that make it possible for us to lead in the way that we need to lead. But what happens is we think we want to do that. We know we want to do that. We come into either a new position or even into existing positions. And there are all these stop signs. So we encounter people who don't have vision. We're stuck with the silos. I know somebody on the call is going to agree with that. We don't have the courage, actually. somebody's micromanaging us, somebody doesn't want to change, somebody isn't in alignment, somebody's burnt out. So it becomes increasingly difficult to pull all that off, especially with the pressure from above and below. And this is where I want to focus for the rest of our time, because in my experience, and Reagan, I don't know if this is true for you as well, design thinking doesn't fix everything, but for me, it was a critical unlock in my practice as a leader. I was able to bring everything that I learned before and just take it to the next level, because the frameworks and mindsets and methods, we'll talk about all of that in a minute, are all designed to help us with all the things that are difficult and that don't always come naturally to us, like empathy, like creativity. Most of us don't even think we're creative, like collaboration. And seeing how it can fit into our worlds is essentially what gets me out of bed every day. I really love working with leaders to take them forward so that they can achieve things they didn't think were possible with their teams. So this is where we're going to play today. Any questions, any thoughts? Feel free to pop something in the chat. Susan's going to watch and let me know. You can
Something in the chat yet.
Yeah, you can agree, you can disagree, but let's get into it. So a few of you coming in, some of you are bigger experts in design thinking than I am. Correct me too. But a few of you coming in were saying that it's not really something you're terribly familiar with. So this is not necessarily a crash course, but a very quick overview of what I think is important for us to know about design thinking to understand how it can impact how we work. So the first thing is, it's actually, for those of you who have never really seen it before, it sounds like something that those people do. They're in that breakout room somewhere. There's sticky notes everywhere. It's a mess. It's not what I do. It's not my thing. But actually, what we learn once we get into it is that it's not this messy thing. It's a very disciplined approach. And what it's going to help us do is be more creative and more collaborative when we're working together. And when we're doing it, it is designed to not let us forget who we're solving the problem for. So we're not solving it for the board and we're not solving it for the company. We're understanding who's really struggling, whether it's a client or an internal challenge, and we're organizing ourselves to get to a better answer faster. And the way that we do it is essentially through three elements. One is a framework. Frameworks help because you know where you are in the story. The other is the mindsets. And the third one is some methods. And they work together to pull off the magic. And so when we talk about the design thinking framework, if you've heard anything about design thinking, you've probably heard, oh, isn't it that empathize thing? And doesn't it have prototyping and testing? And so what this framework is showing you is that if you have a big, difficult challenge in front of you and you want to work through it, rather than feeling compelled as a leader to know the answer at the beginning of the story, this is why I like the framework. It gives you permission to say, excuse me, I can't give you the answer right now because I don't actually understand what's going on. I need some time to empathize, to learn. I don't need a lot of time because design thinking can be incredibly productive. But as the leader, I don't want to feel like I'm on point for knowing the answer out of the gate. I think a lot of leaders feel that's what leadership is that you tell everybody what to do all the time. Design thinking says, hold on a minute, unless you have done your homework, make sure that you understand what's going on. Because when you open your thinking and you start looking at the problem, you might come out the other side once you process all that information and define things slightly differently. You might discover that the real challenge is not actually where you started. And that's incredibly valuable because then you're not going to build something for a problem that isn't really the main story. That's excellent work. The next trick is not to jump to the answer, not to say I found the issue and the answer is we're going to do X. What design thinking encourages you to do is pull together a team of smart, diverse, curious people. And we'll see the methods in a minute, using different ways of working, come up with a lot of ideas. that ultimately are going to be reviewed and processed and prioritized and de-risked so that by the time you pull off whatever it is you're going to pull off, you're going to be much, much closer to the prize. And I think we all think we're intuitively doing this, but when you've got people who are dissenting and others who are not participating and people who are putting pressure on you to get to an answer, this kind of falls apart. So I appreciate having the framework in the back of my mind so that when somebody's asking me something and they want me to come up with an answer, I can validate that we're working on the right problem. And if we're not sure that we are, I can go back in the cycle and say, we're actually not where you think we are. So I feel like this is a gift to seasoned leaders to stop the train when it shouldn't be going as fast as it goes, personally. The other thing that we'll see, and sometimes I think these slides should be reversed almost, is when we come into the world of design thinking, it's a different experience because we're bringing a different mindset to our work. So rather than having lots and lots of documents, we're going to be more visual. Rather than telling people what to do, we're going to be more empathetic and ask questions. Rather than do work by ourselves in silos, we're going to be more collaborative. Rather than feeling embarrassed about coming up with crazy ideas, we're going to be encouraged to do that. Rather than asking or feeling afraid to ask dumb questions, we do that all the time. And we don't feel bad if we need to go back. So this is, I don't know about you, but maybe I just had a really harsh upbringing in management. When I worked for Carnegie, Capgemini, and CIBC, but this was not a thing. This was not how we roll. And having the freedom to flow this way is really helpful, but also not natural. And so the only way to really pull it together is doing the hard work, honestly, of learning and incorporating different ways of working, different methods, different tools and techniques as you work through the framework, because those methods, and you'll see this in a minute, actually create the space where those mindsets are actually supernatural. It's not, I'm going to force you to be visual and damn it, you're going to collaborate. These methods that we use in the world of design thinking push us into that space very easily. And so the mastery, a lot of people in the world of design thinking will say, oh, I know what it is. It's that empathy to frame thing. And that's true. For those of us out there like Reagan and like a few others on the call, like Bershu, it's not enough to just know that. We want the magic. How did you do that? How did you move through these phases so productively and everybody's still smiling at the end of the day? What was that? And that's really what I want to get into today. But I feel like for starters, that's what I'd love those of you who are new to design thinking to be looking out for. Yep, you'd absolutely see the Luma Institute in here. I am a Luma certified design thinking instructor, and I train for them, and I've worked very closely with them in Mural. And we can talk more about that. For those who aren't familiar with Luma, it's one of the schools for design thinking out there, and I really appreciate how smart and tight their methods and approaches are. Okay, so for those of you who've never really seen what it looks and feels like in the wild, this is a client example at a children's hospital of a big room of people doing very important work together in a design thinking sprint. So in some situations, we really are taking a very difficult challenge the way through the framework and trying to get spat out on the other side. And it can take it, this one took a week, for example, of very hard work together. Great. So this is an example. And what I like about this one is if you take a second and you peek here, you'll see on these sticky notes on the Pringles, very creative, on the Pringles tube, you're seeing real deep insights from this team. What are they saying? Inconsistent staff accountability from leadership, quick hire full fit, inconsistency in managing out low performers. So they're critiquing their leadership, but they're not scared to do it because their input is anonymous and they're being encouraged to dig deep into the challenges that they're really facing. So what I love about this way of working is that it just moves us away from all of that discomfort with actually saying what we think, because we're not trying to tell our boss that we think that they're lacking in a particular way. We're working together to just talk about what's going on. So these are the in-person sessions, and it's delightful to do in-person sessions. It's wonderful to meet people and have fun and eat Pringles. Not always possible. And so thankfully, we live in a time where there are methods and techniques so that we can mimic that experience and do it remotely. And Reagan and I will talk a little bit more about this, but whether you're on any other kind of whiteboard technology at this stage of our lives, I think that this is as basic a skill these days as PowerPoint or Excel was back in the day. This has to be, in my experience, something that as leaders we're comfortable doing, because it allows us to bring that input forward, even if we're remote.
Hannah, I would add that you don't have to be comfortable doing it to do it. Like, you just have to do it, and you'll get comfortable as you do it. Like, there's no like mastery that you have to have at a certain level to go use these tools. Just get there.
Exactly. And I think that they're designed to let you stumble in and build your capability as you move forward.
Hannah, we have a question in the chat relevant to what you just said, and I wonder if you just take a look. Are liberating structures similar?
Karen, I'm going to have to ask you to unmute yourself and tell me what you mean by liberating structures, because I'm not an expert in that.
Hey, how are you? Good to
I'm
see
good. How are you? It's lovely to see you.
Yes. No, I don't know if you've ever seen the liberating structures, but they have a series of activities that are really meant to unleash that potential too of the group instead of just group think. And so stages. And I've also seen design thinking in action as well. So I just wondered if the book that Luma puts out, if that's similar or different. But if you're not familiar with liberating structures, I'm pretty sure that's going to be a tough one to answer.
I'm going to look it up and get back to you, Karen. But I said, those of us who are, who are familiar, thank you. Everybody's answering the question for me.
Oh, it's far more complex. Okay, cool. Thanks.
Yeah. And what Luma did is they looked at 1,000 different collaboration methods. You can call them like design thinking. I think we all use the word interchangeably. And they pulled the ones that they thought were most relevant and helpful. And I appreciate their hard work and following their lead rather than looking at 1,000 myself. But I always add to my repertoire, like service blueprints and different things, depending on what we need. But I'll definitely take a look at that.
Thanks, Karen. Yeah.
I am good. I wanted to tell you a little bit about how it works in action. And while we do two things at once at SALT, how we try to introduce people to this body of knowledge, usually we're given very little time. This is, somebody was saying in the chat that these new methods are not simple. They look simple, but learning how to use them takes some practice. But nobody gives me a week to train. They give me a day and a half maybe, or in this case, 8 hours with Spur. And so with Spur, who, as Reagan, maybe I don't know if you want to chat a little bit more about this, but a pretty impressive, small but mighty company.
Yeah, so we're a consulting firm, as I mentioned, based in Bellevue, Washington. I run about 1/3 of our business, which is that ecosystem consulting. We also have 2 other business units that do marketing and communications, as well as change management and operational elements. But we've got about 260 consultants, and design thinking is something that we've invested in. And Hannah's been through numerous cohorts of training through our teams. And it's something that we take to the clients that you see on this list.
Great. Thank you. You might wonder why Spur, of all people, might be interested in design thinking. I think it might be because I told them to be. Back in the day, when I was looking for something different to do, I was offered a position at Spur. And I said, I think consulting is stale. I think that the people sitting around the table teach exactly what they learned at Deloitte or wherever 30 years ago. And I discovered this different way of working. I think everybody should do it. And thankfully, for me, they were interested in learning more. And it became, as Reagan said, a thing, because they knew they needed better results for their clients. They knew they needed to differentiate themselves. And frankly, they weren't doing that well on their own innovation internally. So they were open to try something new. And they said to me, what do you think we need? And I said, design thinking. I need to understand what your situation is so that I can define a program for you. If I just tell you in my first meeting, I'm not doing what I say you're supposed to do. So I interviewed their folks. I learned more about them. I learned how much time I had and how to do it. And over the 3 years that we were working together, we ended up having different levels of training. So we'll talk a little bit about the intro program today, but we came up with the CTJ, or continuing the journey, for the people who wanted to go deeper, like Reagan. And we also designed design thinking coaching for leaders who didn't have the time to go through the whole program. So lots of different levels and ways of working. And as Reagan said, our stuff is up on the wall somewhere. I think physically, a lot of consultants came through this. A lot of cohorts were hosted. We always had wait lists for the training. Could be because there was no other training going on at the time. But people were keen to learn it. And we heard that it had been integrated into more than 50 projects. As Reagan was saying, people are starting to just do this naturally when they do their work. All right. What does training look like? How did we introduce Reagan to this? Reagan, I did my homework and I found your actual cohort. You were in cohort 19. So we'd had a bit of practice before we got to you. And what you're seeing in front of you is a mural board that has all of the work that we did together in the training experience. And this is another reason why learning these technologies can be helpful. It allows you to do things that you can't do in a PowerPoint or in a regular board. So the first thing we always do is we introduce people to the technology, like I mentioned. There's Reagan. So now you can see why it was so delightful. Reagan, would you like to listen about what's going on here?
Yeah, well, so I think they said, tell something about yourself. And so I put in that I like the beach, that I'm from Utah, that I like shopping, that I Pokemon, and then I shared my picture. Obviously, my hair is a little different now, but just it was a fun way to show something about yourself. And it helped us understand who was who.
Exactly. And even if you're it's amazing, because we did this many times, how in just a few minutes with just a few visuals, going back to the mindsets, going from people who we don't even know because we're not even in the same part of the country, within 10 to 15 minutes, we can really get a sense of each other. And Bersha, you'll remember this from the work that we did together. When you're in person and you don't want everybody on their computers, you could ask somebody to design a tattoo that they might be comfortable one day placing somewhere. And when we do this, these types of icebreakers go so much deeper than what I did with you. Tell me where you're from. Realizing that we're setting the tone for a very different type of interaction is a big part of this. And then, Reagan, the other thing that we did was over the 4 sessions, we had 4 2-hour sessions, we tried to give people a sense or a taste of different methods and different combinations so that they could walk away from the session with the knowledge, I wouldn't say ability, because somebody here in the chat put practice, which is true, with the knowledge of how to go from start to finish, but also the ability to pick and choose a method or two if they had a particular type of challenge. And the way that we did it was, and this is something I do in all of our trainings, I try to let people get a consulting project out of the whole deal rather than learning about pretending they work for an airline or something. So the first method we did with your group was visualize the vote, which is a way of very quickly reading the heat in the room around where the interest can lie. And, this is the technology to do this is very easy. It's easy to do in person as well. And what I love about this method, and I'd love to hear what you think too, because I know you use it a lot. What I love about this method is without something like this, you can imagine you're holding a meeting, there's 4 different options, and you open the conversation for discussion. And somebody puts up their hands, and I think we should do option 2. And the third person says, no, I've done option 2 before, and this is what it was like. And it goes around. And at the end of the day, it really wasn't that hard to do because at least most of us still, all of us on this call, understand democracy, can deal with it if we see that there's a lot of interest in something, especially if we're learning. So it's a way to move through things quickly to read the room. Reagan, you like this one. I've seen it in some of your work.
It helps to fully allow people to have so much of an opinion and not just like everything, and really dials things in and shows without it being a raise of hands or peer pressure where things really land.
And the nice thing about doing this remotely in tools like Mural is that while you're voting, you can't see what other people are voting for. So you really do have to think for yourself. Sometimes, unfortunately, when you're in a room and you're putting sticky dots up somewhere, you start to see everybody's going there. I'm going to go there too. But this is a great one to just cut down on the noise and keep the work going. So I like to start with that one. And we ended up choosing how to establish a more robust onboarding program. And then we're not going to get into lots of methods today because that's not really the point. But as we roamed through, Reagan, this is your group. I'm taking you down memory lane here.
It was cool because the process took us through all the design thinking methodology, not all of them, but took us through the design thinking methodology. So we're just going through the process, but we're learning how to do it as we went through it and getting exposed to it. And it was very efficient. And you could see the application into different areas. At least for me, it was like blatantly obvious. And while I've done these types of methods in person, back to your in-person example of the sticky note on the board, I have the big giant sticky notes, the small sticky notes, all the Sharpies to do that. I hadn't always thought about, in the world we live in now, that's not a very conducive, that's a very expensive meeting to have, right? But this takes all the notes for you, documents it all. I don't have to take pictures. It just opened my mind to so many things that I started just build it into project. And I didn't even call it design thinking. It was just like, this is how we're going to debrief. This is how we're going to figure out what phase 2 looks like. And I just started applying it. And as I mentioned before, you don't have to be a master of it to look like a master of it. Because if you're introducing someone to this, my flight was blown away. Like, that was and I quote you, that was the most effective meeting we've ever had. It wasn't in person. And they were just completely blown away. I was like, wow, I was just winging it half the time. But it was awesome to see. And we just kept refining.
Yeah, no, you're so right. I, during the pandemic, only worked this way. So when I needed to go back in person, it was a little sad because you're right. You're putting down the sticky notes. And in fact, in one of my in-person meetings that I had where we were doing a lot of work and it was going to be almost impossible to sticky note the thing, people brought their laptops and we worked online in person, which is another way to have that connection but still get the work done. What we're seeing here is just, as you said, and I use the word design thinking mostly because I'm lazy. I want people to have a sense of what I'm talking about, but there's so many layers to this that design thinking couldn't possibly describe. It's the overarching category heading for working in a collaborative and creative way, but you're right. You never need to mention the word. And some of my clients hate the word, so we don't mention the word, right? It doesn't really matter what you're calling it if you know what you're doing. What I also appreciated is about working this way is, like I said, you don't need to bring 15 methods in order to have an effective meeting. You can also have just one, like this one, which is a crowd pleaser. So in this particular one, you have a challenge statement that people are starting with. Everybody gets a color for their first idea for how to approach it. And they sit in their zone and they come forward with their idea. And you can tell some of them are very detailed. So to your point, Reagan, another reason why we love the technology is because you can go on and on if you want. You almost never run out of space. Your text just becomes very slow. And what this little method here shows so much about what this way of working is about, because you're being thoughtful about the challenge. You're collecting input. You're asking lots of people how to approach it. And then you're checking that idea right at the beginning, rather than saying, oh, let's do this for 6 months and see if it's going to work or not. We immediately ask, why might that fail? Because we're not afraid to ask that question. It's actually not failure. And so that checking and critiquing each other becomes part of what we do in this particular game. You hop over to the right and you critique the person above you. And everybody gets to be the critic. It's not like just your ideas being critiqued. And then for the final round, you hop over one more, and then you're going to review what somebody else said, what somebody else critiqued, and you're going to fix it. And this exercise, I know Bersha used this with his leadership, this exercise can take 20 minutes to half an hour. And at the end of it, you have got so much rich content. People can star the pieces that they like. You really get out of the gate with some forward movement where everybody has been involved. Nobody spoke over anybody. And what I personally appreciate about this and the other ways that we see this working, and this goes back to what we're trying to do as excellent leaders, often there are people who are quiet and they don't say anything. And working this way allows all of us to see the creativity and the brilliance of our peers and our colleagues. And all of a sudden, we start to appreciate them so much more because they're super smart. I couldn't have come up with that. That's genius. It changes the tone. I don't know if you've seen that, Reagan, or anybody else. In this is when you ask people to start drawing something and then you look at the person to your right and didn't know anything about them, and they're a brilliant artist. It's another way of appreciating each other that I really like.
I was going to say I love this, Hannah, because for me, it does exactly what you say, but also is a great team building exercise.
It is. It really is.
You have people in the room and they are going from one idea to the next, and you see the interaction, even if they are not talking to each other. It's magnificent.
Thank you, Bersha. And I think that's the word. I don't mean to be weird about these methods, but they are magical. They really are. How would you do this in half an hour with executives who never want to do anything, right? If you're going to put something in front of them, you want something really strong. And thank you, Luma, for digging these up for us. And that means that by the end of an 8-hour training, Reagan and her team can have a ton of fun and come up with a concept, who it's for, what problem does it solve, what's the big idea, how would it work, why might it fail, what should we test, how could we measure success, and how long is it going to take? If you think about your teams and having to put together a PowerPoint like this to show to leadership, this is a month of work. And it's back and forth, but if you're in the right zone, if you're collaborating and working well together, you can be super smart like these guys. Spur Labs, the source of inspiration. How adorable is that? Well done. So this is what I try to pass on to my clients when we're training. And each training is a little bit different depending on the team and the types of work that they do. But at the end of this, people like Reagan fly the coop. So Reagan, tell us what you were doing here.
So I had a really big client project. And at the end of that first phase, we realized that we needed to figure out a way to plan the second phase. And we already knew that there were going to be challenges because everybody on the team on the client side had different ideas, and they're pulling against each other. And we also had one person that could dominate the meeting. Immediately, I thought, well, if we take it into design thinking and get into neural, I can flatten that person's voice and even out everybody's ability to provide input. And what I needed them to do was identify the challenges that we had in the project as being their challenges and figure out a way to solve them moving forward and come to an agreement on what the future state would look like, not only from a project standpoint, but how we were all going to work together and resolve the problem. And that's what you see here. And it's really small. But we took him through a whole, I think it was a set of 2 workshops, about 2 hours each, that got us to the planning of the next phase and agreement on what went wrong, accountability on their side, and how we were going to change the next phase so that we didn't run into those same problems. And the cool thing that it did was it gave everyone a voice instead of the one person that always had the voice. Even though they did try to dominate the speaking part, everybody had the neural part of the voice because they were able to own their own states and have their voices heard within the design thinking activity. And this is the client that came back to me and said, this is the most efficient meeting we've ever had. And they just come out of a set of in-person meetings that were days long. And we got more out of these 4 hours than they got out of 2 or 3 days. So it was pretty impactful. And then we started to look at opportunities to just, it wasn't like we're selling the specific design thinking strategy as a project. It was just, how do we go in to our existing projects and use this so that we're more efficient? And we just started rolling it out. And there were several other projects where the team was like, man, we should have done that up front. They would end up doing it like later in the project instead of inserting this type of the example in the like initial set of the project. But it was amazing how efficient, I'll say just the efficiency of doing this.
Yeah, and I think it was good for you guys too, Reagan, right? Didn't you sell more work as a result?
Oh yeah, we did. We came out of this project with basically the scope for the next project with the team. It was pretty awesome.
Yeah. So Reagan was like me. The minute I learned this, I think you probably took this to them the next week. There was any time in between. I was similar. I took it to the client the next week, and I actually didn't remember everything that I learned. I'm just going to be honest here. It was an in-person meeting. There were 60 people. I was doing a creative matrix. I had them ideating for about a half an hour on different questions, and we ended up with over 500 ideas, which was too many. I didn't know you shouldn't go for so long. So I think you learn as you go. It wasn't a disaster. They didn't. We learned. But it's important to feel empowered to try and start making impact, even if you're learning as you go.
And I would say one of the things I did that made me successful, they didn't think I knew it all. So I went and tapped on the people who'd gone through the training before me and had used it more, asked them, I put some things together and asked them for their thoughts. And then I tapped Hannah and said, what do you think of this? And refined it through, those who've gone before me. And could it have gone better? Maybe. But like when the client says to you, this was super effective, I think we nailed it. And then it just leveled up their thought of us as thought leaders and partners, trusted advisors, that we were willing to bring these methodologies to them and work in an efficient manner.
Yep. And then now I'm going to say, and the student has become the master, because this is what your work looks like now. Then you said,
so we now use it. So this was an example of something we did internally. So I ended up taking on more teams last year, and I had to get people to work together. And so what we did was we had an all hand meeting across our team, and we used design thinking to do a pre-mortem. And I love doing pre-mortems. It's basically what could cause us to fail, right? And if we can get those failure points out on the table, we can try to solve for them up front. And I've done this with partners that we work with on partnerships. I've done this with the team. And so we basically said, what's going to prevent us from working well together? What are the blockers? And then we did our, series of design thinking activities. And then as a leadership team, took the blockers and we put together a plan to address those things. And then every meeting we have, we show the progress that we've made against the key learnings that came out of this. And in fact, we just had our second our quarterly all hand yesterday, in which I did a readout of, here are the things that we took from this activity here. Here's the status of what's been accomplished, what's in progress, and what's for the future. But everybody has a say. And again, if you remember back to my introduction, I run an engineering team, a data team, a strategy team, and an automation team. And those people are comprised of very different personalities. Engineers tend to be, very introverted. They don't want to speak. They want to just sit back. Same with a lot of the technical folks, whereas the strategic thinkers want to talk it through. And so this gave everybody a voice and an opportunity to bring to the table the challenges that they saw. And we were able to address all of them, regardless of if they were the introvert or the extrovert.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks, Reagan. Karen, I see you have a question. Do you want to?
Yeah. Quick question for you. As you were part of a group of a company I used to work for, and they did this, and they took the concepts to heart, and they did really good job really incorporating that in some of their hub meetings and such. Is there a rule of thumb of how many types of activities you should do consecutively versus just picking one or two? Because I think like the vote was one, and I think like Rosebud Thorn is an.
Yeah, so
like those types of things. Is it? Yeah.
Yeah, you have to think about the time frame that you have and the outcomes you're trying to drive. That's always where I start with. What am I trying to get out of this? And then I look for the methodologies that are going to help get there, and thinking about the people that I might have, or what I'm trying to drive to, and how fast I need to drive it. Sometimes you've got an hour, sometimes you've got 30 minutes, sometimes you have 2 or 3 hours. And what you can accomplish in that time frame is very different. And sometimes you need people to walk away and come back to it as well. So I would definitely say you don't want to use everything in the toolbox, right? Like I have this on my desk, the Luma guide with all the different options, but you got to be thinking about, what am I trying to get? How do I maximize my time? And which thing is going to get me that output?
Yeah. So Karen, when I worked with you, when you were, I think this was the Blue Pearl work, right?
Yeah, that's correct.
That was an invitation to come and train people. And I think I had 4 hours to work through a challenge. And I think I was able to introduce you guys to about 5 or 6 methods in total in that time, maybe. And so if that's what you learn and that's all you learn, you feel like that's the world of design thinking and the world of these methods. But that's where in situations like that, you're just opening the aperture a little bit. Over time, for people who are interested and committed, there starts to be an appetite for learning more of these methods so that you can plug and play more comfortably. The work we did together, for example, didn't have any ideation in it. There wasn't any time. If you're in a meeting and you want to ideate and you only have those 5 methods, then what do you do? So what I typically try to do is get people into the space and then either work with the clients to go deeper, like we did at Spur, or point people to resources so that they can learn themselves. But just overall, I would say, as Reagan was saying, you always have a limited amount of time. You don't want to stuff the envelope so that it's exploding. And certainly if you're working online, I think that you can't really do more than 2 hours before you get a bit of fatigue going on.
Hannah, we have 10 minutes left, but there's a question from Brian. How do you make sure the findings are actionable and not forgotten?
It's funny you mentioned that. I have a good friend and colleague who I work with, and his whole space is, and then what? After the workshop, and then what? I think that this is when it's on us, going back to these leaders and excellent leaders. If we're going to pull people together and go through all this work, and then we're fly on how fantastic it was, and then we drop it. I wouldn't say nobody, but I feel like when you're planning for a meeting, you have to plan for what you're going to do. You also have to plan for what you're going to do afterwards. What the methods really help you with, though, if you know what you're doing, is by the time you close your meeting, there's several methods: voting, prioritization, importance, difficulty, all sorts of things, to help you close the meeting in a really tight way so that it is clear what you need to do next. They're not like festivals where you have no idea what's next. So I think that part is quite helpful.
And I think you have to plan for that piece. So when we did our internal meeting, I had my LT meeting right after that meeting. So we weren't even going to wait on it. We were literally coming out of that. And I think we met later that same day to go through the things and action it and start taking the next steps. And we knew how we were going to follow it back up with the team. Because the last thing I wanted to have happen was like, hey, I want to hear what your thoughts are. And then, we're not going to do anything with that. So if you plan the follow up or what the takeaway is going to be while you're planning it, you're more likely to follow through and be successful. But you have to be thinking it end to end. Like, what?
Exactly. So basically, don't mess with Reagan as well. You're doing it on this call. But I'm going to zip it a little bit. Thank you for the time check, Susan, just so that we can see our story together. Reagan is a special one, but it also mirrors what several other folks at Spur have been able to do with what they've learned. So this has been integrated into Microsoft projects and all sorts of other initiatives. Some of the consultants from Spur were so excited about this, they left to make it their careers, right? And worked with me for a while. That this can be as leaders, it's helpful for us. Personally, I think that as leaders, we should give this gift to the people who work on our teams to make their work better and easier as well. I personally feel that responsibility. So really what I've been saying is that I see this design thinking, whatever you want to call it, as the hard skills that drive that leadership excellence. We know what we want to do. It's just super hard to do it. And we've used these words. Some of you put these exact words in the question about leadership excellence. But this is what we see every single time. Nobody can push back from the table when you're working like this. Nobody's on their phone, right? Or maybe one person brushing, but generally speaking, we have a lot more engagement. We have a lot more productivity. We get so much more work done. Our answers and solutions are more creative. We don't leave the room saying, I can't believe what so-and-so said, I'm not going to do it. We leave in alignment. We bring in all that diversity of experience and opinion and background. And generally, it's just a more optimistic way of working. People are smiling when they're doing this. They enjoy it, especially if there's chocolate on the table. And the numbers back us up. Reagan, you were talking a lot about productivity, a lot about efficiency. You may or may not know this, but IBM is one of the largest design thinking practices in the world. I think they've trained over 120,000 people in their methods, which are similar, but got a twist on them. So they can study the impact. They find companies are 2 times faster to market, 75%, which is a huge number, reduced design time, and 33% reduced development time. That's crazy, right? McKinsey found the same thing when they look at companies who do this. Their shareholder value is higher and their revenues are higher. So there's something going on, regardless of what you call it, around learning these more advanced and collaborative ways of working. So I know we've had a few questions coming through. I just want to show you the last few things, and then I'm happy to stay on a little bit if anybody else wants to chat. But I want to encourage you to learn more. There's a lot on our website that has case studies and examples of what we do. I've been asked to do this many times, so you're the first to hear that I am going to offer a SALT collaboratory training opportunity for people who want to learn this but are not part of a company where this is happening. And I want to try to do it as a gift you give yourselves before the end of the year, especially if some of you have learning stipends at your companies that you want to spend, where we would have 3 2-hour sessions. I'd stuff you with some of these methods around leadership challenges, and then a tail with some office hours and ways of helping each other. So I'm going to make more information available. But those of you who've been thinking, well, how can I get some of this? And I don't want to learn it from the book. Let's see what we can do together before the end of the year and into next year. But basically, I just want to encourage you to either sign up for my training or somebody else's training. I'm happy to talk to anybody, as you can tell, big talker. Happy to chat. Website has stuff. We can stay connected on LinkedIn, and I have my email address. I think, Susan, you're going to pop some other links into the chat.
I'll do that now.
Yep. Thank you. But actually, I'm so excited to read through the whole chat because I was flying through a lot of this. I want to say thank you for making the time in the middle of your day. Reagan, thank you for sharing your experience. And Susan, thanks for helping. I'll hang out if anybody wants to visit. But otherwise, we'll make this recording available, and we hope to see you again on this and other topics soon.